Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. I'm in a place where I'm not being blinded. I'm Mary Portelli from the West Pittston Historical Society, and I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. Fortunately, it's a little warmer than our last program, so that's a good thing. We had a wonderfully exciting year of activities for the West Pittston Historical Society, celebrating America 250, and as well as our great West Pittston history. This is, in addition to the 250th birthday of our country, it's also the 25th anniversary of the West Pittston Historical Society. So we're really, really happy to be celebrating that as well. In, I believe it's going to be August, we're planning a 25th anniversary celebration for the Historical Society that will be showcasing our fantastic collection of artifacts and memorabilia from West Pittston. There's going to be more on that, but it will be sort of an all-day type of thing, and people will be able to come out at their leisure. So keep your eyes open for that if that's something that would interest you. Our membership, many of you knew our former treasurer, Bill Rowe, who was just so much of a part of West Pittston. And every year when we would do membership, Bill would say, "We got to get 100 members, we got to get 100 members." And every year we would just fall like in the 70 or 80 range. We would never quite get up to 100. So this year I'm instituting the Bill Rowe Challenge. And we're trying to, in honor of Bill's memory, Bill passed, for those of you who don't know Bill, he passed away in January, and we miss him terribly. But in his memory, we're really trying to get to that 100 members this year. So if you find it in your heart to become a member of the Historical Society, we do have membership forms on that back table. We also take business memberships. If you have a business, we can advertise your business and promote that at our events and on our Facebook and other social media pages. I would also like to thank our business members so far, Riley Associates, Big Top Rentals, and Miller Rosenthal Architects, and we thank them for their generous contributions to our organization. And also, I'd like to thank Ray Judge, who was our very first America 250 membership. We have a membership level this year that if you take out America 250 membership, it gives you some research. We'll do some research for you, and we will promote you as well. So thanks to Ray Judge for that. Tonight's program on the three gentlemen for whom Wilkes-Barre and both of the Pittstons were named. Our presenter for this is our local author, historian, social media star, and reenactor, Karen Quinones. Karen is best known as Mrs. Q. I guess that's your stage name.
Yes.
And Mrs. Q has led Revolutionary War tours in New York City, and we are so lucky that she has moved to this area. And she now does a lot of her work here, and she's a member of 24th Connecticut Reenactors, and I thank you all for showing up tonight. And we just feel such a bond with them. They do so much for us throughout the year in many of our activities, so we feel a real connection to them. Welcome, Karen. We're looking forward to hearing about this.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me. And thank all of you for coming out tonight to give me an opportunity to do the thing that I love to do and that I do best, talk about the American Revolution, the incredibly inspiring story of how our nation started. And what better place to do that than in a place where the towns were named for three great members of the British Parliament. We'll be talking about those three gentlemen tonight. Now, to me, one of the most amazing stories when I moved here was that the people who came here, those people who came from Connecticut, I'm sure many of you know the story, the people came from Connecticut to settle this area as part of something called the Susquehanna Company. And they were given a charter to settle this area. Unfortunately, when they arrived, they found that the king had already granted the land to someone named William Penn. Now this may be surprising to you, but it's not surprising to someone who knows the time period, as our good friend Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, said, the king is the last person who should ever make a decision about anything. As he is completely removed from society and reality. And you might know that the symbol of Britain is a lion. And we see this in Revolutionary War cartoons all the time, with Britain represented by a lion and America by a snake. And Thomas Paine went on to say, we know nature never meant us to have kings, for why would she send us asses as lions? And I think George III proves this fully when he cedes the land to two different groups of people, who then wind up fighting brutally for possession of that land for more than 30 years. So people come from Connecticut, which at that time is crowded. People want to get out of Connecticut, right? The coastline is crowded. Plus, Connecticut at that time has a very strict hierarchical system of wealth and power, and people want to get out of there. So they come here to the beautiful Wyoming Valley. And it must have been like heaven to them when they saw it. And I love this print showing them coming down. You can see the settlements on the river and how beautiful it was. So they come here, they build their settlement, or begin to. They go back to Connecticut, they come back, it's destroyed. And this goes back and forth for years, becoming violent interactions between the people we'll call Pennamites and the people from Connecticut, Yankees. So those are the Yankee-Pennamite wars. Now, in the midst of all of that, the American Revolution happens as well. So there's more conflict that the people here have to deal with. And astoundingly, they are way out here on the frontier, I don't know how many days from Connecticut, so weeks from any kind of news. Yet they still know the story of these three men. These three men, William Pitt the Elder, the Honorable, maybe not so honorable, John Wilkes, you can decide by the end of the night if he's the Honorable John Wilkes, and Colonel Isaac Barré, Isaac Barré, originally French. But of course the English would call him Barré, right? Because the English are going to serve those French names, those Frenchies. Barré. These three gentlemen, members of the British Parliament, at a time when we're in rebellion against the British Parliament. Yet they named two of their original 5 townships for these three men. What an incredible story. So tonight we're going to talk about what these three men did that inspired them to do that. And I hope you'll find the story very inspiring yourself, and that you'll learn a little bit about our history here. Now, I do also have to tell you that I'm going to be talking about John Wilkes, of course, and I see some of you have laughed a little bit when I mentioned his name, so you may know some of his antics. On the way here in the carriage, Mr. Q looked at me and very seriously remarked, "Mrs. Q, we will have no mischief this evening." Clearly, he was referring to the time that I told Congressman James Madison that the ladies of New York thought he had the social skills of an anchovy. Which of course was true. The ladies did think he had the social skills of an anchovy, and he did have the social skills of an anchovy. But I hear he's improved quite a lot since he married the widow Todd and has become president. So Mr. Q has still not forgotten the embarrassment of that moment. But how can we talk about John Wilkes, who was a master of mischief during his time? So these are our three men. Now, to talk about why these three men are important, we have to go over a little bit of school history. You know, the kind of things you maybe have in the back of your mind from your school days. It's kind of rusty, and you know, you might have some cobwebs in there. So we're going to go over it really fast to give you a little bit of a refresher course. And the first thing that we're going to talk about briefly is something called the French and Indian War. And here we have a beautiful print of one of the British militias, Rogers Rangers, done by the extraordinary artist Don Troiani. And the French and Indian War. Well, the French and Indian War, all you really need to know about is it's about 20 years before the American Revolution. And as usual, the English are at war with all of their rivals in Europe. And they're also at war with France here. So you'll also see the English refer to it as the 7 Years' War, as they're fighting for 7 years over there. We don't really care about that part very much. But they do fight over here against the French, and they're fighting for territory here on the American continent. And they also managed to get on their side some native Indian tribes, right? So the Americans get the Mohegans and the French get the Huron to fight with them. So this becomes an Indian war as well. Many Americans are going to fight in that war as soldiers and as officers, like General Washington and some others. Israel Putnam, Lord Sterling are all going to be soldiers in the French and Indian War, later heroes in the Revolutionary War. And the war comes to an end, England wins. Yay, we won the French and Indian War. And, but they're broke. They're broke. Cost a lot of money to fight that war. And what did they have to do to get the money? They had to borrow it from bankers. And now they have to pay back the money. And they don't have the money to do it. So they start thinking about, where are we going to get this money to pay for the war? And they start thinking about a place that they really had not thought about at all for nearly 100 years, the American colonies. And somebody in Parliament got this excellent idea to tax the paper here. They passed something called the Stamp Act. So the Stamp Act taxed all paper that you used here in the colonies. Some of it was official paper that came from England that was embossed. Some of it required that you place the stamp on it. And it was every piece of paper you would use for anything, from playing cards to business documents, legal documents, diplomas, newspapers, pamphlets. And of course, this went over really well in the colonies, as we can see. We can see they were really happy about the Stamp Act in the colonies. You can see them happy in Boston, happy over there in New York. And so the protesting against the Stamp Act began. And, it wasn't so much the amount of the Stamp Act, but it was the act of the taxation. And one of the things we're going to be talking about a lot tonight is rights and liberties as guaranteed to all subjects of the British Crown by the British Constitution and something called the Declaration of Rights. So if you were here in America, you believed, and we're going to see some people legally argue, that if you lived here in America, you had all of the same rights and privileges as a subject in England. And that meant you couldn't be taxed without representation. And the colonies elected no one to Parliament. They said the tax was illegal, and you know what they all did? They joined up and started yelling, no taxation without representation. And this was probably one of the dumbest things ever done by the I was going to say Congress, sorry, Parliament. The dumbest things ever done by the Parliament, as it did something that never happened before. It united the colonies against them. The colonies were never united. Think of the colonies in England like a hub and spokes. London is at the center of the hub, and the colonies are at the end of the spokes. So if two colonies have a dispute, say Connecticut and Pennsylvania, they don't talk to each other. Their colonial agents talk to each other in the Parliament, and they decide the resolution to the problem and send it back. So the colonies sent what we call colonial agents. Now, they weren't allowed to be on the floor of the Parliament, but they sat up in the balcony, which was called the lobby, and they became lobbyists. And that's where the word lobbyist came from. So they're our first lobbyists, and Benjamin Franklin was a lobbyist for Pennsylvania. So their job was to go there and look out for the interests of their colonies. So the colonies didn't really care about each other. The newspapers were full of news from London and Europe, not the other colonies, until they did this. And the colonies united for the very first time. And they were shocked in England. Oh, the colonies will never unite. But here in America, the view was that the people who lived in homes you see on the left had mismanaged the finances of the empire, and now wanted people who lived in homes on the right, and even lesser homes, to pay their debts for them. So that was how it was viewed. The peers and the aristocrats of England have spent us into oblivion in this war, and now they expect us to pay for it. And this is where the American spirit was born. Right there. You know what you can do with that stamp pad. And here we have the American spirit, right? With the butt facing forwards, saying, right? You do that. So this debate goes on. The Stamp Act is passed. The colonies, unite. They have riots. They have protests. They drag the stamp agents through the streets, and they start arguing about rights because they say the British government's job is to secure our rights, life, liberty, and property, or you might know it as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Governments are instituted deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And their job is to secure life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's Thomas Jefferson, our Declaration of Independence. Well, Jefferson didn't just think that up out of nowhere. There were a couple other guys who were writing about it. 10 years before Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Well, 11 years. Two gentlemen, I put these here for you really serious, hardcore history nerds who might want to read some of this. And these are two pamphlets that came out at that time. The one on the left is written by a man in Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins. He didn't put his name on it because Stephen Hopkins was always in a lot of trouble. So Stephen Hopkins, and on the right, James Otis of Massachusetts, both writing about the rights of the colonies. That the government cannot deny the people of the colonies their natural born rights as British subjects. And this is where that legal argument starts in the colonies. And there are some other lawyers in here you may have heard of that are also arguing this. A guy in Virginia you might know, Patrick Henry, who's later going to say, give me liberty or give me death. And someone you might not know, William Livingston of New York, who had a little law firm that in Parliament they referred to as the damn lawyers in New York, the wicked triumvirate. They were so sick of them. So colonies get together and they say, you know what, if you want to do this to us, we're not going to trade with you. We're not going to send you raw materials for your manufacturers. We're not going to buy your manufacturers. We're not going to get your ships land. And we're not going to buy anything that comes in on your ships. And they all said, oh yeah, let's see you do it. It only took 3 months of that for the king to repeal the Stamp Act. The colonies got the first look of their economic power over the crown, and the Parliament got a look at that power too, and nothing would be the same again. Now I really like this little cartoon here about the death of the Stamp Act, and I really only brought it tonight to show you one aspect of it. It's published in England, and you see they're having a funeral procession for the Stamp Act. The reason I wanted to show it to you, you're laughing already, is the little dog peeing on the This little dog shows up in a lot of political cartoons, and it's fine. Peeing on whoever the person is being quoted in the cartoon. So we have the guys, the death of the Stamp Act. And this is a really interesting and complex comic that I won't go into because it's all English stuff. So one of the things we don't learn about in school that we really should learn about, and we'll be talking about tonight, is England. Because, you know, we learn about the American Revolution, and to us, it's our American Revolution. And we are at the center of it. And it's all about us, right? It's all about the Stamp Act and uniting, and the Quartering Act and uniting, and the Tea Act, and the Tea Party, and all the things that are happening here, and then the Army, and George Washington, and the Declaration. But everything that led to that is about England. Everything that happened here was a reaction to what was happening in England. And so we're going to talk about the three men in the Parliament who were embroiled in all of that and why they were loved in the colonies for what they did. And the first gentleman we're going to talk about is Colonel, we'll call him Barré tonight, Colonel Isaac Barré. Obviously he was a soldier and a member of Parliament. Mr. Barré, his family were from France. They were French Huguenots, meaning they were Protestants escaping Catholic persecution in France. And they went to Ireland, so he was born in Ireland. Very well educated, Mr. Barré attended and graduated from Trinity College. And Trinity College at that time was like the elite of the elite. So when someone has graduated from a place like Trinity College, they're better educated than virtually anybody who exists in America today, probably. A bachelor's degree at that time was the equivalent of something beyond a doctoral degree today. So education was very rigorous. So he graduates Trinity College, and he goes off to fight in the King's Army. A lot of guys did that. He buys himself a commission, and he fights around the world for the British, and he winds up here in America for the French and Indian War. And he's going to be fighting in the French and Indian War. But more importantly than fighting in the French and Indian War, he's learning about America and Americans. He's seeing America with his own eyes and experiencing it. The American story, the difficulty that people had coming here, establishing the colonies, all they were up against, how hard they worked for what they had. And this had a great impression on him. Because as he noticed when he went back to England, nobody there who was deciding anything for the colonies had ever bothered to come to the colonies. They had no idea where it was on a map and had no idea what it was all about. But Colonel Barré did. Now, Colonel Barré in the French and Indian War found himself at the Battle of Quebec in 1759, where he was shot in the face. And as a result of that, he lost the sight in one eye, but kept the other eye. And this is a famous painting of his commander's death at Quebec, the death of General Wolfe in Quebec in 1759. And some of you might know there's going to be a very famous death there again at the end of 1775. American commander Richard Montgomery with a very similar painting. This is done by Benjamin West. Benjamin West was a painter in London, and he trained virtually every fine painter in America. So, all those portraits you see of the officers of the American Revolution, Washington and everybody, they're all done by men he trained. Gilbert Stuart, John Trumbull, Rembrandt, I always forget his name, Rembrandt Peale, and his father, Charles Wilson Peale. All of them trained in Benjamin West's studio in London. So the death of General Wolfe. Colonel Barré goes back to England, and I should say Ireland, and he attains a seat in the Parliament, in the House of Commons. And so the House of Commons has two houses, right? The upper and lower house. House of Commons, which is elected and represents all of the people of England, supposedly, and the House of Lords, which is the peers of England. The peers are the aristocrats, the peers of the king, earls, dukes, baronets, viscounts, and lords. And those seats are inherited. So you'll see somebody as like the second lord of something, or the third earl of something. Today, some of these seats, they're up to the 15th earl of whatever. The actress, Jamie Lee Curtis, her husband is a lord in the British Parliament. He's like the 15th earl of something. The comedian, I forgot his name, Michael something. Anyway, so she's married to a lord, and a seat that family has had probably since the 1600s. So it's a hereditary body. But the Commons is the important body because the Commons is the check on the king. The British monarch, because of the British Constitution, does not have the omnipotent power that the monarchs of Europe had. He's limited in power by the people, the Parliament. And for that reason, British subjects loved that they were British subjects because they couldn't be abused the way they were in other countries. They were protected by that Declaration of Rights issued in 1688. And so people loved being subjects of the crown. They had great, lives as subjects of the crown. They were protected by England, and here in the colonies, they were pretty much free to do whatever they wanted to do because the colony, England wasn't paying any attention to them. So this means a lot to people to be British subjects at the time. It is the finest life in the world, and when it comes time to listen to loyalists or Tories, that's what they will tell you. Why would you want to give this up for something unknown? For what might be anarchy. So that's what our loyalists are sticking to, that idea of being a part of the British Constitution. So, Member of Parliament Barré is a little bit different from his other members in that he's actually, as we mentioned, been to the colonies. Knows a little about the colonies, life here, how big the place is, what the people do for a living, what their thoughts are on things. And when they were debating passing the Stamp Act, he found himself in a debate with Charles Townshend. Townshend is going to be the biggest advocate for the Stamp Act and for a lot of really bad things that came after that they should have been smart enough not to do. But politicians, what do I want? The greediest ones always win the battle, right? So you've probably heard of the Townshend Acts. And I'm going to read you a little bit of the debate between Townshend and Barré. Not all of it, just some notes here. So Townshend is arguing for the Stamp Act. Why shouldn't the colonies pay for the war? We fought for them, right? We fought the French and Indian War for them. What a lie. Well, that's the idea over there. So he says, and now will these Americans, children planted by our care, nourished up by our indulgence until they are grown to a degree of strength and opulence, and protected by our arms, protected by our arms, will they grudge to contribute their might to relieve us from the heavy weight of that burden which we lie under? And Colonel Barré's response is famous to this day. This is 1765, so that's 260 years ago. And he says, they planted by your care. No, your oppression planted them in America. They fled from your tyranny to a then uncultivated and unhospitable country, where they expose themselves to almost all the hardships to which human nature is liable, and among others to the cruelties of a savage foe, the most subtle, and I take upon me to say, the most formidable of any people upon the face of God's earth. They, nourished by your indulgence, they grew by your neglect of them. As soon as you began to care about them, that care was exercised in sending persons to rule over them in one department or another, who were perhaps the deputies of deputies to some member of this house, sent to spy out their liberty, to misrepresent their actions, and to prey upon them. Men whose behavior on many occasions has caused the blood of these sons of liberty to recoil within them. They, protected by your arms, they have nobly taken up arms in your defense, have extended a valor amidst their constant and laborious industry for the defense of a country whose frontier, while drenched in blood, its interior parts have yielded all its little savings to your emolument. The people, I believe, are as truly loyal as any subjects the king has, but a people jealous of their liberties and who will vindicate them if ever they should be violated. But the subject is too delicate, and I will say no more. Did you catch that phrase he used?
Yes.
Sons of liberty. And from that, these fine gentlemen took their name. Maybe not such fine gentlemen. And here we have a typical night in New York with the Sons of Liberty having a dispute with the soldiers. And I like this one because you can see the wig on the ground that some officer has lost. Well, this is how the Sons of Liberty get their name, from Colonel Barré, the Sons of Liberty. Now, in New York, while all of this was going on, and they're all inspired by Colonel Barré's speech, and all of the things we're going to talk about, the other two gentlemen are also standing against the Stamp Act. A ballad was published. It was called An Excellent New Song for the Sons of Liberty in America. And it will give you an idea of how the Americans viewed themselves and this tax. And they said, in story we're told how our fathers of old braved the rage of the wind and the waves. And they crossed the deep o'er to this desolate shore, all because they were loath to be slaves, brave boys, all because they were loath to be slaves. Yet a strange scheme of late has been formed in this state by a knot of political knaves, who in secret rejoice that the Parliament's voice has condemned us by law to be slaves, brave boys, condemned us by law to be slaves. With the beasts of the wood, we will ramble for food, and we'll lodge in wild deserts and caves, and we'll live poor as Job on the skirts of the globe, before we'll submit to be slaves, brave boys, before we'll submit to be slaves. This birthright we hold will never be sold, yet sacred, maintained to our graves. Nay, an heir will comply, we will gallantly die, for we must not and will not be slaves, brave boys. We must not and will not be slaves. So you can imagine, little reciting that, some rum in the taverns, and they're out for mischief, right? The gentleman who wrote that was a man from Huntington, Long Island, named Benjamin Prime. Benjamin Prime had said that as a result of his identity being known, he had to walk around with 2 pistols on his belt to protect himself from writing that. So it gives you a little bit of an idea that to accept this tax, this direct tax on them from the Parliament, would make them slaves to the Parliament, as Mr. Barré warned, right? They were jealous of their liberty. Don't try to take that away. And then I have here to show you, I found this. I was looking for something else. Always happens during research. And I found this article from Boston on March 31st, and it's a letter from Colonel Barré to James Otis, who wrote that pamphlet I showed you of Massachusetts. Mr. Otis had written to Colonel Barré and told them how inspired the people of Massachusetts were by his debate with Townsend. And Colonel Barré wrote back, and he said, it really wasn't anything extraordinary. It was just what was in my heart at the time. So an incredible man, right? So incredible that word of all of this reaches here to the Wyoming Valley, likely from the people of Connecticut. Connecticut, big supporters of the Sons of Liberty and Colonel Barré. So Colonel Barré is buried today at St. Mary's Church in East Raynham, England. And of course, every time you talk about or hear about the Sons of Liberty, you're remembering Colonel Isaac Barré, great man. So who is our next gentleman? Oh no, it's mischief time. Oh, here he is. The Honorable John Wilkes. I had a friend of mine from the 24th asked me if he was cross-eyed. I was like, a pretty strange looking guy. We're going to see some other prints of him because they drew him all the time. John Wilkes declared himself to be the ugliest man in all of England. And he has a very long story before he even gets to the British Parliament, but he also is very well educated, attending Eton and Oxford. So we have another very well educated gentleman. But when he gets into the Parliament, he's not exactly welcome there because he already has been quite a radical. John Wilkes was very outspoken about the way elections to the House of Commons were held. So I don't know if you ever heard of any of the jokes that there were boroughs in England that elected no one, and then there were boroughs that only had a few cows who elected someone to the Commons because the elections were completely corrupt. There were people who were not represented at all, and then there were cows that were represented instead. So he was an advocate of the elections being fair and that all of the people should be represented in the Commons. So you can imagine when he took his seat in the Commons, he already wasn't the most popular person there, surrounded by corruption. And here we have Mr. Wilkes and Frederick North, Prime Minister, or Lord North, as he's known. And these two have years of witty debate between them. And it's said that one night they were at a dinner. Mr. Wilkes went up to Mr. North and said, "Why, sir, who is that ugly woman over there?" And North responded, "Why, that's my wife. And we are the ugliest couple in all of London." To give you an idea of some of the laughter and some of the joking that went on between members of Parliament. Well, Mr. Wilkes is also going to be against the Stamp Act, and of course coming up the Quartering Act and the Tea Act and all of these things, because he also believes it is against the rights of Americans. They are full British subjects and entitled to all the rights and privileges of British subjects, meaning they cannot be externally taxed. They can only be taxed by their legislatures in America. Only the people they elect. So John Wilkes joins that voice. I should tell you that the gentlemen we're talking about today all belong to a political party called Whigs in Parliament. And Whigs in general supported the rights of the colonies. Not necessarily us breaking away, but supported our rights during these arguments. The Tories were an older party that wanted authority over the colonies. Their view was that the colonies had to accept parliamentary authority over them. Where some of these guys said, get out of here, let them just govern themselves. They do a better job themselves. And so, Mr. Wilkes is also a printer and a publisher, right? And he published a little magazine called The North Briton. And it was a satire of a Crown magazine called The Briton. And this gets into all kinds of stuff between the Irish and the English and the Scots, who all don't like each other, right? Are all like slamming each other, making fun of each other. And in number 12 of the North Briton, Mr. Wilkes had insulted a Scotsman in the Parliament so badly, his name slips my mind, that he challenged Mr. Wilkes to a duel. He said, "Okay, let's have a duel." And the two men decided to have the duel at night so no one would know they were doing it, right? So they had this duel in a park at night. Don't have any lights. And they both shoot and they miss. They shake hands, they go to a tavern and drink a bottle of wine together. And then, shortly afterwards, their opponents from both sides claimed the whole thing was a publicity stunt for the two men to get votes for whatever they were representing in the Parliament at the time. To give you an idea of what, some of the antics they were up to. But it's number 45 on the right, which gets Mr. Wilkes in a lot of trouble in England and makes him almost a god in America. So number 45 of the North Briton goes on to really insult the King's ministry under a guy named the Earl of Boot, who's a Scotsman, and also insults King George. And when George reads it, he is really upset. He says this is seditious, it's libelous, it's pornographic, and he orders them to issue a general warrant for the arrest of Mr. Wilkes and everyone involved. Now, general warrants existed in America too. If you read the Declaration of Independence, you'll see they'll complain about them. A general warrant can literally be used to arrest everybody in this room. It's just a general warrant. Okay, well, you. So they arrest Wilkes and all his guys on the charge of seditious libel, pornography, all of that good stuff. And Wilkes claims, you can't arrest me. I'm a member of Parliament. I have parliamentary privilege. I can't be sued for libel. Because to be sued for libel would mean the men on the floor of the Parliament would not speak freely about what they wanted to represent or present or debate. Right? If you could be arrested for libel, you wouldn't be free to speak. So that's a protection from the House of Commons and a protection we enjoy today, right, in our Congress. That members of Congress cannot be sued for libel for what they say on the floor in Congress. And you could guess that gets abused sometimes. So he says, you can't, I have free press, you can't do this, this is an invasion of my rights as a member of Parliament, it's a disruption of the free press, and the judge agrees with Wilkes. He says, that's right, Wilkes has parliamentary privilege, he can't be found guilty of this, he can't be tried on this, and they let him go. And then Wilkes sues the guys that went on his property to arrest him for damages. So it's just Wilkes. But the whole scenario about number 45 and Wilkes going to jail, claiming parliamentary privilege, the number 45 then became a rallying cry in England and in America to Wilkes, liberty, and the number 45. And here we have the number 45, and two of my favorite cartoons of all time. On the left, a new method of macaroni making as practiced at Boston. What the heck does that mean? We have two guys in the Sons of Liberty, right? He's got his number 45 up there on his hat, that's how we know. And the other has the bow over there, that's how we know. And they're all dressed in all these clothes that don't match. And they are getting ready to make the tax man drink the tea, right? This is all about the Tea Act that's coming up. And they're probably gonna hang him over there. You see a little rope they're gonna hang him from. But it says a method of macaroni making. What the heck does that mean? You know that song, Yankee Doodle went to town, riding on a pony. Stuck a feather in his hat, called it macaroni. Did you ever wonder what the heck they're talking about when you sing that song when you're little? How does put a feather in your hat? Macaroni. Well, it's not macaroni like we eat. It's macaroni like you see in the picture on the right. The picture on the right is a caricature of a gentleman known as a macaroni. A guy who gets all dressed up in the most outrageous court fashions. So you see, they're making fun of his hair. He's got his hair in a high roll like a lady would wear. Look at his shoes. He's got his little dressing table. That's a macaroni. So what they're saying in the song, and about these guys here, Yankee Doodle. Yankees are, from New England. A doodle is like a, useless person. So Mr. Yankee Doodle goes to town, riding on his pony, right? He puts a feather in his cap, and he calls it macaroni. He puts the feather in his cap, and that makes him think he is dressed to the height of court fashion. And so you see these two guys here, with all their mismatching clothes and the bows, as macaroni, being ridiculed in this print as well. This is a great print by Dawes. Did a lot of these, but I love the macaroni on the right. It's not to be confusing a macaroni with a fop or a dandy, which are all negative or pejorative names for men who like to either dress up too much or maybe dress in women's clothes or maybe like other men. So we have macaroni, fop, and dandy from the time. And then of course, there's our share of caricatures of John Wilkes himself. And here he is, drawn by a very famous engraver in England, William Hogarth. William Hogarth did two incredible series. One is called The Rake's Progress. It's about a young man whose father dies, he inherits his fortune, and he loses it all on hookers and taverns, gets syphilis and dies. And the other is about a young woman who goes to, who's going to say New York, goes to London looking for a job, and she winds up in a brothel. And she also develops syphilis and dies, very sad. But they're warnings to people not to get involved. Hogarth was so well known for drawing about English life. And this is Hogarth's view of Mr. Wilkes. Look, he's got his Liberty cap up there on his stick. He's got his hair, looks like little horns, little devil horns. and he's got that devilish little smile on there, right? So a nice caricature of John Wilkes from someone on the other side of the political aisle, William Hogarth. And you notice John Wilkes, Esquire, making fun of him. Well, the number 45 incidents now broke out all over the colonies as a result of Mr. Wilkes. And at the end of 1769 in New York, a man in New York wrote this broadside you see on the left. You're not going to believe this. Exposing the New York government, not only of corruption, but election fraud. That the party in power had engaged in election fraud to win the election. It's called To the Betrayed Inhabitants, City and Colony of New York. It's 2 pages long. And he's laying out how all of this happened. And obviously the people who won the election, the faction that won the election, were not very happy. They found out who he was, they put him in jail, charged him with seditious libel, and now he's in the jail for 3 months awaiting his trial. And while he's there, members of the Sons of Liberty show up regularly and do things like cheer for him 45 times, toast for him 45 times. And here we have a notice saying on last Saturday, a group of ladies showed up with a saddle of venison stamped with the 45 in honor of the great John Wilkes, and presented it to Captain McDougall, the man who wrote this broadside. On the 45th day, Captain McDougall was in jail. The Sons of Liberty started the day by barbecuing 45 pounds of meat. They toasted 45 times, and they brought 45 virgins dressed in white who recited the 45th Psalm in his honor. The Tory newspaper then reported, we know these guys are up to their usual lies and deceptions with these purported virgins. As everyone knows, it is impossible to find, you know where this goes, 45 virgins in the entire city of New York, much less who look like they're 45 years old. And Captain McDougall eventually was released from jail because the only eyewitness to him being the author of this, the printer, died, and you have a witness to yourself, something else we get from England, and so they had to release him. And he became the Wilkes of the colonies. So we see these 45 incidents popping up everywhere. Now, Mr. Wilkes was also a member of the infamous Hellfire Club. And here we have a print of the Hellfire Club, which was a club that met in London. It was a membership-only club. There were men and women who belonged to it. Benjamin Franklin was a member of the London Club. And there are all kinds of stories about the Hellfire Club. That some of them say it was just a fun place where people met and drank and got together. They were known, though, for hiring lots of prostitutes, sometimes dressing them up like nuns, things like that, and engaging in other types of things, including mind-altering substances of the time. Not just drinking, but other things as well. Well, there's a story that one night at the Hellfire Club, they planned to have a seance. They were all drunk or drugged or whatever they were taking, and not very aware of what's going on around them. They're having this seance, and all of a sudden, a gorilla or ape of some type starts running through that Hellfire Club. Scared the crap out of John Montague. John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich. So bad that he got on his knees and started praying to God to forgive him for his sins. Of course, the ape was released on cue by someone that Mr. Wilkes hired to do it. So, mischief indeed. Now there's another great story that one night John Montague, who was a political rival of his, right, they're opposite sides of the political aisle, walked up to Mr. Wilkes and says, "Why, Wilkes, I don't know if you'll die on the gallows or die of the pox." And Wilkes says, "Well, it all depends on whether I embrace your politics or your mistress." And here's the mistress. She was a famous mistress. She is. Fanny Murray. That was Montague's mistress. And by the way, there really was an Earl of Sandwich, right? He was the 4th Earl of Sandwich. So this is Fanny Murray. So to get back at Montague for other things. John Wilkes and a friend of his go ahead and they print this poem, an essay on woman, in 3 epistles. And it's about her, and it's blatant pornography. It's seriously pornographic, right? And so Montague gets really mad. He wants Wilkes expelled from the Parliament for doing this. So he reads it in front of the House of Lords. and the Lords are just appalled at the whole thing. Oh my God, I don't believe we're hearing this. And they expel Wilkes from Parliament. They expel Wilkes from Parliament. They're going to prosecute him for pornography and sedition. And he flees to France. And they tried him in absentia and found him guilty. He returned, and then he spent a couple of years in prison for writing this. But you know how politicians are. Got out of prison, and he ran and became mayor of London. That was at the end of his political career. And John Wilkes lived a long and interesting life. And he is buried here in Westminster, England. So I don't know if you still want to have a college name for him. I'm not sure about that, but an incredible man. I mean, the courage and the character it took for him to stand against that stodgy, old-fashioned Parliament is just really something to admire. And all 3 of these men had that in them, the ability to stand against what they knew was wrong. So our 3rd gentleman is the most famous of the 3. William Pitt, the elder, because there's a younger. William Pitt the elder, 1st Earl of Chatham, because you know those English peers, they've got their family name and they've got their peer name, so you'll see him referred to as Pitt, and sometimes you'll see him referred to as Chatham. The Great Commoner, as he was called, and he lived a really long life, lived for 70 years, which is very good. And Pitt is a Whig, and he's the leader of those radical Whigs. So, just like now our political parties have little, subcultures, right? The Whigs at that time had their subcultures too, and they had a group of radical Whigs within the party. The radical Whigs wanted even less power for the king. They wanted a complete end to the idea of the divine right of kings, and they supported the colonies. Not only that, they supported self-rule in the colonies, that the colonies ought to be able to have their own parliament, which would then send representatives to England. As Pitt said, an island can't rule a continent. We either have to give them self-rule or we have to move the government there. It's ridiculous to think that we can rule over them. He said, look at them. Pitt had been to the colonies many times himself. So like Colonel Barré, he had an idea of what the colonies were like. And he said, the colonies will have this world. They're going to have the world, and they will have it as part of the British Empire, and they will have it without the British Empire. But they will have this world. And they all thought, oh, Pitt has a gout, he's crazy, don't listen to him. Very forward thinking, wasn't he? Because the colonies did have the world eventually. So William Pitt, of course, gets involved in this whole thing over the Stamp Act. He's against the Stamp Act, argues loudly against it, and eventually gets it defeated in Parliament. And right after the end of the Stamp Act, William Pitt takes his title Earl of Chatham. So the Stamp Act is repealed in 1766, 10 years before the Declaration. It's repealed as a result of all those protests that William Pitt supported those protests. And he has an opportunity now to be prime minister. But a commoner cannot be prime minister. And he had avoided taking a title all of those years of his life. But the king made him the 1st Earl of Chatham. So he becomes Chatham, and now he becomes prime minister. So now he's going to serve as prime minister. And when he becomes prime minister in America, he's celebrated, and people start putting up liberty poles to Pitt. Liberty, freedom, right? Love William Pitt. On the right is the liberty pole put up in New York, and on the left is the liberty pole in New York. And if you visit New York City, that's in City Hall Park. So the liberty pole stands in New York. That's a replica of that pole. The British went out one night. You see how they have a grid around there? The British had torn down a whole bunch of liberty poles, and they and the Sons of Liberty had riots. So the last pole, the Sons of Liberty put that iron grid you see around the right. So one night the British soldiers went out at about 2 in the morning, drilled a hole in the base of the pole, stuffed it with gunpowder, and decided they wanted to blow it up. So they attached the fuse, they lit the fuse. By now, all these guys in the Sons of Liberty from the tavern across the street were out there. What are you guys doing? They light the fuse goes out. The Sons of Liberty are laughing at the soldiers, and they have an enormous brawl over that pole. One of the biggest riots in New York up until that time. And then a few days later, the British successfully blew up that pole you see on the right. The pole on the left was placed there in, I think, 1926 to commemorate. It's the same height as the original pole. It's also made of white pine, tapered the same way. Has a little grid around the bottom and the Liberty Vein on the top. I know if you go up to, I know some of you want to head up to the 76 house in Tappan, New York, because you're into the spy story. Tappan has their Liberty pole on the Commons as well. There are a few of them left. So this is all in thanks to William Pitt. To Pitt, liberty and freedom. The Liberty poles go on. And people put up statues of Pitt. So here we have Pitt. What remains of the Pitt statue in New York? And the remains of the Pitt statue in Charleston, South Carolina. Because Pitt did visit those places and he was very well received and very well liked. And then went back to England and argued on their behalf. Now this statue on the left is in the New York Historical Society, a wonderful museum. And I was looking all over for it one day, I couldn't find it. I stumbled into a room, there it was in the corner, and there was a docent there with a big group. I didn't even see her, so embarrassed. Didn't even see her, and I went, oh my God, it's the statue of Pitt. And the whole group turned around and stared at me. And she says, well, I'm so pleased someone likes it. It's the statue of Pitt, and that was on Wall Street for many years. So cities commemorated William Pitt with the statue. But all wasn't good after the stamp tax, was it? Everybody was really happy to Pitt, liberty and freedom. The king has recognized our grievances, removed the stamp tax, recognized our liberties, and then things go bad again. Here's our friends in Boston. Trying to pour some tea down the throat of someone who's been tarred and feathered. And in Boston, you know they had to be different. They had a liberty tree. You know, they have liberty pole, they had a liberty tree. So there's their liberty tree. And this is really great. You see it says Liberty Tree, and on front of the Liberty Tree, upside down, is the Tea Act. This hammer out there is the Tea Act. And you can see them in the back dumping tea into the harbor. And the guys in the Sons of Liberty are tarring and feathering and forcing the tax guy to drink the tea. So the Tea Act, that's the big one, right? Parliament passes the Tea Act. Really stupid idea. Really stupid idea. And the Tea Act is a corporate bailout for something called the East India Company. It's too big to fail, 1773. So the East India Company is in all kinds of trouble because of their mismanagement of their company and their dalliances over there in China and India. And a whole lot of the London financial markets are based on East India Company stock. And the East India Company owes a lot of money to the Bank of England too, so oh no, how are we going to pay back our debts? What happens if our stock falls? The whole economic system will collapse. Oh, we got an idea. Let's let the East India Company sell their tea in America without taxes on it. We'll remove the import-export duties on the East India tea. It'll be so cheap, the Americans will be really happy. They'll buy it instead of all of the other tea, and that will help the East India Company. And you see what happens here. Because the Americans understood what that was right away. Propaganda for the East India Company said to Americans, you love being British subjects. You love everything there is in that. And England is powerful because of the East India Company. If the East India Company fails, the British Empire will fail. And what will become of you here? That's why I say it was too big to fail. But they figured it out in America really quickly and said, forget it, we're not going to do that. We're not going to help you with that. We're not going to buy the tea. And of course, the guys in Boston threw the tea into the harbor. And here's a beautiful Courier and Ives print of the tea going into the harbor. And as a result of that, they got mad in England. Now this is private property, the property of the East India Company. And they said that this crime needed to be litigated as a civil crime, right? They had to find the people who threw the tea in the harbor and prosecute them for the destruction of private property. But that's not what the Parliament did. The Parliament passed something called the Boston Port Act to punish all of Boston for this. And people over here are saying, oh, you can't really do that. This is a really bad idea. And one of the people who said it was a bad idea was Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke, one of the greatest men in parliamentary history. a great thinker and orator. And I think when William Pitt heard Burke speak the first time, he said something about the angels themselves stopped to listen. Edmund Burke on the Boston Port Act. And there's a lot printed here. I'm not reading all this, just segments. So he says, the people of the colonies, first I should tell you what the Boston Port Act is. The Boston Port Act closed the port at Boston, blockaded them. They couldn't get any ships in, they couldn't get any ships out. It closed their port. It removed their civilian government since they were granted their colonial charter. Removed their civilian government and replaced it with a military government run by General Thomas Gage, the highest ranking commander in America at that time. They also removed their civilian courts. One of the rights we had in the colonies was to be tried by a jury of our peers, meaning if you committed a crime here, you were tried here. No more. You would be tried in naval courts, courts of admiralty, or taken to England to be tried. So Edmund Burke has a lot to say about that. He says, the people of the colonies are descendants of Englishmen. They are therefore not only devoted to liberty, but to liberty according to English ideas and on English principles. The people are Protestants of persuasion not only favorable to liberty, but built upon it. And he goes on, he says, let the colonies always keep the idea of their rights being secured by us. Because if they lose that idea, we will lose them. And he goes on and he says that this bill is, first of all, you're trying to pass it too fast before anybody can really debate about it or think about it. So it's too fast, and it punishes everyone for the work of only a few. And he also said it was a really bad idea to try to revoke a colonial charter. Another member of Parliament got up and said to Burke, I really don't understand why we can't revoke a charter that was issued 100 years before any of us were born. And Burke replied with the equivalent of, I have heard a lot of stupid things in this body the years I've been here, but this has to be one of the dumbest things I've heard yet, as if we remove their charter, what's to keep the other colonies from tearing up theirs? Oh, and that's going to happen, isn't it? The print on the right is the Bostonians under distress, and is a print of Boston, people of Boston suffering from the Boston Port Act. So it's showing them all in a cage up there being taunted by the British soldiers. So Mr. Pitt had quite a bit to say about this too, because this is the big thing that's going to separate us, isn't it? So things get really bad. We get the Boston Port Act, they quarter a whole bunch of troops up there, things get bad, and Lexington and Concord happens, right? A few months before Lexington and Concord, William Pitt, who's old now, he's old, he has the gout, he's very sick, he's retired from politics, comes in from his country home to address the Houses of Parliament. Chatham, this is Chatham. And he says, he's there, so a humble address can be presented to His Majesty, most humbly to advise and beseech His Majesty that in order to open the way toward a happy settlement of the dangerous troubles in America, by for preventing in the meantime any sudden and fatal catastrophe at Boston, now suffering under the daily irritation of an army before their eyes posted in their town, may graciously please His Majesty that immediate orders be dispatched to General Gage for removing His Majesty's forces from the town of Boston as soon as the season permits, and other circumstances indispensable to the safety and accommodations of the said troops may render the same practicable. And he says, in this alarming crisis, I come, my lords, with this paper in my hand, holding out his motion, to offer you the best of my experience and advice, which is to beseech His Majesty that he would be graciously pleased to give immediate orders to General Gage to withdraw his troops before the town of Boston and to reopen the way for a plan of concord and reconciliation. He says, there is no time to be lost. Every hour is big with danger. Perhaps even while I am now speaking, the decisive blow is struck, which may involve millions in consequence. And believe me, the very first drop of blood that is spilled will not be easily skimmed over. It will be mortal, a wound of that rancorous and festering kind that in all probability will mortify the whole body. And that is Lexington and Concord that Mr. Pitt saw. Mr. Pitt, like many other Whigs, including British commanders, told the Parliament not to go to war with the colonies for many reasons. And here we have Lexington and Concord, the event that changes the world, right? Because now there's no going back. Now there's no going back, and we're going to fight. Now, Mr. Pitt, unfortunately, predicted that if there was war with the colonies would separate from England, and that the colonies would grow to be bigger and greater than England. He didn't live to see that happen, though. He died in 1778, 70 years old, and look at his gravesite. He's buried at Westminster Abbey. William Pitt the Elder, the great commoner, as he was called. And those are the three gentlemen who were so inspiring to the people here that they named Pittstown or Pittston and Wilkes-Barre for them. And there they are. So it's pretty incredible to think that these men, way over there across the ocean in London, had so much of an inspirational effect on the people here that they named the towns for them, and that they understood that the colonies had friends in London. Now I look around and I know some of you, are descended from those first 40 settlers that came from the Susquehanna Company. And so this is your history. This is your people, your ancestors who did this, who honored these men. And I'll tell you a story my father used to tell me growing up. My father told me growing up, no matter when you came to America, no matter when your family came here, American history is your history. Not the history of the country you came from, but American history is your history. So I say to all of you tonight, no matter when you came here, you may not be a DAR, an SAR, you may not be descended from the Susquehanna Company. Your family may have come here recently, 100 years ago, like mine, or more recently. This is still your history. This is the American story. This is the American spirit. And I hope that this story will inspire you the way it inspired the people here to create a great America. So thank you all very much for having me tonight. Educated woman in American history, the daughter of Vice President Barré, who had her educated equally to men to prove that women were capable of the highest intellectual achievements as men. And it is a beautiful, full-color young adult biography published by Lerner, all about her life. Very inspirational story because Miss Barré was the only woman being educated at a time when women were not. Women shunned her, men shunned her as well, because no one knew what she was. But she turned out to be a magnificent woman, and she had the grace and brilliance of both her mother and father. Her mother was a brilliant woman as well. So if you're interested, I have these if you want to buy one. They're $25, and I'll sign it for you as well. Thank you so much. As you can see, I love talking about the American Revolution, so thank you for giving some time. By the way, Ms. are both dressed tonight in Revolutionary War clothes, and we both made clothes that we are wearing. So we can have a look at two different types of clothes, a more moderate lady, maybe a farm lady, and a more wealthy lady. As you know, my character is a wealthy merchant, so I even have the little, which is a great thing, ladies, because nobody knows what you really look like under here. Great song. Thank you so much for coming.
I learned a lot. I'm sure many of you did as well. And it's interesting to see that some of our early these British Parliament gentlemen had quite a sense of humor, which you wouldn't have expected.
They had a great sense of humor. If you read documents from the time, you'll sit and you'll burst out laughing at some of the things they said to and about each other. They get really nasty and funny. It was an art form among educated gentlemen. How witty could you be, and how well could you insult your opponent? So they just escalate. It's really fun to read.
Awesome. Before you leave, I'm going to ask Marion to stand up and tell you about a wonderful program she's doing next Monday night, I believe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marion Zonowski, and I'm Vice President of the Wyoming Monument Association. And the Luzerne County Historical Society, we're putting together a presentation next Monday, March 30th. It's basically in honor of Women's Month, because March is Women's Month. So it's the women of the Wyoming Monument Association that really raised the money to build the monument. So you'll get a little bit of history of that, a little bit of history of the architecture, and just a lot of information. So this is Monday, March 30th, at the Masonic Hall in Wyoming. It's just across the street and down a little bit from the monument. And it's at 7 o'clock. So I hope you can all join us. It should be a very interesting night. So thank you, wherever Mary is. Excuse my dog. Thank you. Hope to see you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for
Great,
coming
thank
out.
you, Mary.